Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. We're going to talk about an important issue out of Virginia and driver's licenses. And many of you know that if you've got problems paying fines or penalties that get imposed by a court, sometimes they will not let you renew your driver's license, or sometimes they'll suspend your license depending on what you can't pay. And this is a common penalty around America where they'll say, you know something, if someone's not paying their fines and costs to the courts, we will take the driver's license away. So the interesting thing is that Virginia recently stopped doing that. And it's one of those things where, there's an argument to be made by both sides. And I have an issue. I do believe there are some things for which you should lose your driver's license. But they should usually be driving related. But I'll tell you right now, I've seen this more than once, I've seen a person in a courtroom, and there's one courtroom I'm thinking of in particular, where you are sitting in the courtroom and there is a large picture window looking at the parking lot. And I've seen a person standing in front of the judge, and the judge says, "You're here charged with driving on a suspended license." And the person says, "Yes, I understand that." The judge says, "How do you want to plead?" And they go, "Guilty." And the judge goes, "Are you pleading guilty because you are in fact guilty and your license has been suspended?" "Yes, I am." "How long has it been suspended?" "A long time." "When was it suspended?" "Years ago." "Do you have any intention of getting it reinstated?" "Yes, I am, but unfortunately it turns out, still have like 17 points on my license." Whatever. So it's not something they can work on right now. It's not an oversight. They don't have a license. The license is suspended. Driving while license suspended, DWLS. The judge says, "I find your plea guilty, fine you. Can you pay the fine today?" "Yes, I can." Watch the person walk in the hallway, pay the fine, walk at the parking lot, get in the car and drive off. I'm not kidding. And I've sat in a courtroom and actually seen the judge look at the bailiff and kind of go, "Let's see about this." And yep, got in the car and drove off. So some people you can't stop no matter what you do to them. But this all started a while back because the Virginia Senate had approved legislation to end the suspension of driver's licenses of people who had unpaid court fines and costs. So simply unpaid court fines and costs was what they're trying to get away with, or get rid of here. And the measure had passed a while back with broad support, both sides, and they were worried that it could get stalled in the GOP-controlled House. Now here's the deal. Virginia collects about $10 million a year from people paying to reinstate their licenses after they were suspended for unpaid court costs and fees. And that, of course, is one of the problems. I've explained this before. Once the government starts getting the money in and there's a supply of money, a pipeline of cash coming in, it's hard to get them to turn that spigot off. Wait, we're going to lose $10 million? That's going to put a hole in our budget. So advocates had been pushing for a change in the law because they say it unfairly punishes poor people. Opponents of the legislation said it would reward criminals. And those are your two arguments right there, okay? The Legal Aid Justice Center of Virginia had also filed a lawsuit over the practice. The group argues that the law violates due process and is unconstitutional. Well, I'm not sure what's going to happen to that lawsuit because the law got changed. So, as it happened, attorneys of DMV argued that it is not reasonable to define a class of people solely by their inability to pay court costs. They said it would be impossible to assess hundreds of thousands of people individually in order to determine whether they could afford the court costs. So that was the argument that they were making in defense of their position, because what this group was asking for was that the DMV actually hold a hearing on every single person who gets their license suspended and determine whether or not they can afford the fines and costs, and if necessary, adjust the fines and costs to make them match this person's ability to pay, on the thinking that the fine should have some proportionality to a person's ability to pay if we're trying to punish them, and so on and so forth. So anyways, there's been fights going back and forth, but what you should know is the big number that 627,000 people in Virginia have their licenses suspended by the practice of the unpaid fines and costs. 627,000 people in Virginia who've had their licenses suspended that way. And that's a number that, until I heard that number, I was actually thinking, is this that big of a deal? And then you go, oh, by the way, Steve, it's more than 500,000 people in one state. It's like, whoa, that's a number. And that's a number that makes you think there's possibly something else going on here, or something wrong that's wrong with the system itself, okay? Either the fines and costs are levied too easily, or they're too large, or something. Or I don't know, do courts have payment plans? I mean, in Michigan, you can routinely work out a payment plan to pay off your fines and costs. Do the courts take credit cards? I'm not saying that's necessarily an answer for everybody, but I remember a time when they didn't. Now they do. So the final story here that ran a couple days ago and was sent to me by several people. Thank you very much. Virginia lawmakers have voted to eliminate the suspension of driver's licenses for motorists with unpaid court fines and costs. So they've finally done this. The Senate voted Wednesday in favor of Governor Ralph Northam's proposed budget amendment to reinstate driver's licenses for more than 627,000 Virginians who currently have suspended licenses. So 627,000 people could get their licenses reinstated simply by the stroke of the governor's pen. Current Virginia law mandates the automatic suspension for the unpaid court debt. And Virginia, as I mentioned, collects about $10 million a year from people who pay to reinstate their licenses after they've been suspended. So, again, they're going to lose that money also. I'm assuming the court costs and the penalties still hang out there and have got to get paid somehow. It's just you can't use this hammer of we're going to take away your driver's license to make you pay the money. And again, the Legal Aid Justice Center of Virginia had sued over the practice, which is now being ended because they're pointing out that it unfairly punishes poor people. So it's a dilemma, and that's it's one of those things. And I've don't get me wrong, I've been in court before, and I've had clients of my own, and I've seen people before the court who are doing their best, because you can't negotiate with the judge in that sense, but doing their best to explain to the judge the hardship that fines and costs are going to have on them, or losing their license is going to have on them. And it depends on the situation where if there's discretion, a judge might say, okay, I'm going to let you drive, I'm going to let you drive here to there, but not all the time, or something, kind of restricted license maybe, depending on the situation. And I've also seen it before where a person has said, Your Honor, I can't afford to pay that. And I've seen a judge say, okay, how much can you pay? Let's work something out. And, I've seen judges do that, where they take into consideration the person's ability or inability to pay. But like I said, when you've got 627,000 people whose licenses have been suspended, there's something bigger, wrong here. And so this is one way to fix it, But the other point I have to make, and I don't want to bring this up for the sake of simply talking about sovereign citizens, but I've talked before about how there's people out there who say you don't need a driver's license. And we have a tendency to think that people like that are just crazy, that they're just, something wrong, the tinfoil hat is a little bit too tight, as we say. And that's sometimes the issue. But sometimes the issue really is that people who are desperate will often make irrational decisions. Or people who are desperate will often believe things they wouldn't believe if they weren't desperate. Okay? And, for example, why would somebody go to another country to try some wacky, quack medicine? Well, if the doctors in America have told you there's nothing you can do, we can't do anything for you, and somebody in another country says, we can. If you're desperate and you think you might die, you might go, well, somebody's offering me hope someplace else. So sometimes many of the people who are on the videos or on the internet talking about how you don't need a driver's license, they're not believing that because in the clear light of day, in a typical situation, that they would believe that. They're believing it because they want to believe it, because they have to believe it, because it's the only way they can drive in their mind and do it legally. Because when the state says, we've taken your driver's license away, you are not allowed to drive, and somebody comes along and says, I know you can't get your license back, but you don't need it. Let me explain to you why. Most people would go, nonsense. But the person with no driver's license, who needs a driver's license, or they need the ability to drive, is going to believe it, or more likely to believe it, because of the fact that it appeals to what they need to believe at that moment in their lives. So, believe it or not, 627,000 people in Virginia without driver's licenses, many of them were probably driving and telling people, it's okay, I don't need a license. But now they can get their license back, suddenly they're going to go, you know something, that sovereign citizen stuff, didn't make much sense to begin with. So I hope that's possibly one of the side effects of this. But if you're in Virginia, good news, if your license is suspended for unpaid fines and costs, you'll get your license back. However, I suspect the fines and costs still have to get paid someday. So we'll see about that. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.